on the table, but on the chart, the nerves that are coming out of the upper 5 cervical vertebrae are going to contribute to the cervical plexus. And then here would be the brachial plexus. So if I wanted you to identify a plexus, I'm just going to put one of the number stickers on it like that, where there's multiple nerves that indicates a plexus. So that would be brachial plexus. Down here would be lumbar plexus, so above the iliac crest. And then the sacral plexus would be down inside the pelvic cavity, right, with our sacroventral rami. So on your diagram, A is referring to the cervical enlargement that we associate with the cervical plexus. And the cervical plexus would be the bracket I. And the brachial plexus would be the bracket J. The lumbar enlargement is just above the conus medullaris, so that would be letter B. And then we have the lumbar plexus, as I indicated here. There is no such thing as a femoral plexus. The femoral nerve actually comes from the lumbar plexus. So change femoral plexus to sacral plexus. Remember that this morning I said there was a mistake in the lab manual? And that would be bracket L. C is conus medullaris, and it's the end of the spinal cord, not the spinal nerves, but the end of the spinal cord, where it tapers to form a cone shape. It tapers to a tip. So conus medullaris is going to be right here. Okay? And in your diagram, it's letter C. And all the spinal nerves have to find their intervertebral or sacral foramina. And so they're going to descend all the way down into the sacral canal to find those. And that bundle of spinal nerves creates the cauda equina. So on this model, I would indicate that by arrows on both sides, that I wanted everything between the arrows. And cauda equina would be letter D. It helps if you just draw a circle or a ring around those so you know it's the entire bundle. Now within that, though it's not a nerve, is the filum terminale. Filum terminale means last fiber. And so from the tip of the conus medullaris, if you look at the very tip, it looks like all of the other spinal nerves, but from the very tip, the center one is going to be the pia mater forming the filum terminale. Non-nerve tissue, and that's letter E. Okay, you can find pictures of this model if you do an internet image search. So I've got spinal model. H is spinal nerve. It's just that small segment at the intervertebral foramina. But again, I wouldn't tag that on here, nor would I tag the ventral or dorsal rami. It's too compact. I would do it either on that cervical model in the middle table there, or on the chart. All right, you won't see the diagrams that you had your quiz on today, but they're very similar to those models. Okay, the quiz diagram you would see in the lecture exam. All right, so let's turn the page. We did that already. So let's move to 112, 113. Now these are the spinal nerves. So we have these 3 skeletal models that have the yellow wires on them. These models cost about $70, and then Dr. Carter had a student do a summer project putting the wires on. Some of the numbers are missing, but the numbers that are on there match the numbers that are on your chart on 112 and 113. Okay. Some of these are fine, but I prefer nerves on models rather than wires sticking out in space. So I'll show it to you both, and I will have some of these on the lab exam, but I also prefer to use where you can actually see the nerve in the muscular compartment. All right. So cervical plexus, as I indicated, would be seen on the charts. These models do not have a cervical plexus. They start with the brachial plexus. So brachii means arm, so all the nerve fibers that you see here coming out of brachial plexus includes C5, C6, C7, C8. So there are cervical nerves in it, but they're going into the upper extremity. So brachial plexus is 2. Lumbar plexus is 19. And they did it right this time. Sacral plexus is 20. All right. Now, For the cervical plexus, in lab you only need to identify the phrenic nerve. But remember in lecture with the muscles, and today I added ansa cervicalis, that won't be something to identify in lab, but just recognize it innervates the muscles of the neck below the hyoid bone. Okay? So our phrenic nerves are found in 2 of these 3 models inside the thoracic cavity, and they are number 18. Or I might tag the diaphragm and say, name the nerve that innervates this muscle. Okay, and that would be phrenic nerve. Brachial plexus. For lecture, you need to know what nerves come off of the posterior or medial or lateral cords, but you don't need to identify those cords, in lab. All right. There's a possibility, I haven't done it in the past, but Carter is setting up some of this next lab exam. So there might be a question, say on the ulnar nerve, identify the brachial, the component of the brachial plexus, and ulnar nerve would be a branch of the medial cord. But I've never set it up like that. That would be in a lecture exam. All right, so posterior cord, we have 2 nerves. The axillary nerve, which on the model here is a very short one, and it wraps around the neck of the humerus. It's going to innervate the deltoid and teres minor, and it is number 14 on your diagram. On the upper extremity model, if you take the deltoid off, you can see the axillary nerve, again, wrapping around the neck of the humerus right here. Okay, so that's axillary nerve. It's a short one, and it just kind of wraps around and goes up into the shoulder area. Innervates deltoid and teres minor. So you can write those muscles or compartments down as you remember them as you go through, so even in the lab you're reminding yourself of that part. Radial nerve is going to be coming down the back of the arm and ending up on the thumb side. That's number 9. Remember on this diagram you're looking from the back. Okay, so you're going to see more posterior clearly than anterior. So number 9 is down near the thumb. It's easier to see radial nerve on our model. So here's radial nerve just under the anconeus, over the inferior to anconeus, over extensor carpi radialis, longus, and brachioradialis. You can also see radial nerve over the supinator and radial nerve on the back of the hand. And again, radial nerve would be 9. For the medial cord, the ulnar nerve is going to be seen here along the little finger side, because that's where the ulna is. And on the model also along the little finger side, so number 17 would be the ulnar nerve. And remember, the ulna passes posterior to the medial epicondyle. So when you bang your elbow and you get that tingly finger, it's really the ulnar nerve that's the funny bone, not the humerus that's the funny bone. So 17 would be ulnar nerve. And then median nerve is listed under lateral cord, which is not completely accurate, because medial nerve is a combination of both nerves from the medial cord and the lateral cord. So both of them contribute to that. And it runs along the middle of the forearm towards the thumb. And so that would be number 16 on the diagram. And the musculocutaneous nerve starts medial, pierces the coracobrachialis, and ends up lateral. It really isn't hanging out in space like this, but it becomes sensory along the forearm, along the thumb side. A really good place to see it is on the model. If we take off the biceps brachii, it's this nerve on the surface of the brachialis, because it innervates that anterior arm compartment. All right? So that's a really good place to see it. So musculocutaneous is 15. Lumbar plexus. In lab, the only ones you need to know for lumbar plexus are the femoral nerve and the obturator. So femoral nerve passes anterior to the front of the pelvis. It goes over the pubic bone right here, so that's number 4. An obturator nerve, I need to make a correction on your lab because it's not really the one that's marked on your lab. An obturator is 8. So you guys want to help me remember how the lateral femoral nerve is tagged, and they need to look all the way over. So if you look at their diagram, They need to draw that line over to the medial nerve. So you have it done correctly. Let me show you. You'll remember as soon as I show you. So they have this nerve tag, which they don't have to know, and the femoral nerve is actually this one.
Oh, the inner one, yeah.
Yeah. So let me get it. So it's the big fat one, number 7, is sciatic nerve, but medial to that is the femoral nerve. So just take that line and draw it all the way over. You can come in from the other side.
8?
So 8 is correct. 8 is obturator, but 4 is marked here. And it's actually here.
All the way.
All, yeah.
Oh, so that's.
Yes. So that you have it correct. So all of this is femoral nerve. Okay. So just draw the 4. Okay.
Yeah.
And yes, you have it done correctly. Not that one, all the way over here. That one. See that correction? So, we're showing it up here at the top, and this is where we're going to see it. So draw that line all the way over. It is. Did I say 8? I'm sorry. 5 is correctly obturator. 4 should be all the way over to here. Yeah. 5 is obturator. Yes. I'm sorry. I was. Yeah. 5 is obturator. 8 is pudendal. Sorry. So we can also see obturator on these models. It is 5. Sorry. Obturator is 5. Obturator is 5, where it passes through the obturator foramen. You can also see it up here on this lower extremity model. Remember obturator internus, we could see in here where that muscle covered the obturator foramen. And this nerve right here is the obturator nerve, where it pierces the obturator internus and enters into the medial thigh. Okay? So femoral nerve, you can see on this model, is going to be passing from behind the psoas major, which covers it superficially, under the inguinal ligament and into the anterior compartment of the thigh. Do you remember what I said in lecture we call it when it's at the medial knee and in the leg? It's not seen here because it's superficial and cutaneous. It's innervating the skin. The saphenous or saphenous nerve. So it's like musculocutaneous. Musculocutaneous is motor and sensory to anterior arm. And then from the elbow down it does the thumb side of the forearm, sensory only. So it does the big toe side of the leg, sensory only. All right. So that's the saphenous part. You only need to know femoral for nerve, but I had saphenous in the lecture notes, and it's the rest of the femoral nerve where it's doing sensory in the medial leg. All right. So obturator nerve is 5, and then we move into the sacral plexus, and I showed you lumbosacral trunk. On this model up here, that's the best place to see it, and that should be letter 6 on your diagram. Now, sciatic nerve is formed of 2 nerves. Remember I said there's nothing actually innervated by the sciatic nerve? And so when we look posterior, the sciatic nerve is leaving the pelvic cavity here, and then we visualize it coming out underneath piriformis. And it's really the medial part of that is going to be the tibial nerve. And the more lateral part of it is the common fibular or common peroneal. When we can't tell them apart, we call it sciatic. But the semimembranosus and semitendinosus are actually getting fibers from the tibial component of sciatic. And then we separate sometimes high. You might see the common fibular coming off really high or really low. But as soon as it separates it, then we can start naming it its component parts. So common fibular or peroneal is going to go lateral, as you see here. And tibial is going to go straight all the way down and also innervate posterior leg muscles. So that is the tibial nerve. So on your diagram, then again we're looking at the posterior view. 7 is sciatic. 10 is common fibular, and 11 is tibial. And now the common fibular is going to innervate the lateral compartment of the leg and the anterior compartment of the leg. So number 12 is deep fibular. And you can see it on this model as well as on the small leg models where the extensor digitorum has been removed. So it's running in the surface superficial to the interosseous membrane, and it's deep, hence deep fibular or deep peroneal. Superficial fibular number 13 is going to innervate the lateral compartment, our fibularis brevis and longus, and then it's going to become sensory only, and on the large lower extremity models there you can see it on the anterior surface of extensor digitorum longus. All right, so this would be, we don't have it on the smaller leg models, but that would be superficial fibular right there. Okay, number 13. Pudendal nerve, we used to have on these ones, and it started breaking and it fell off here, but pudendal nerve is a branch of the sacral plexus. It is going to come out. I had a this one? No. I had a piece of. That's okay. This is longer. So remember, the sciatic nerve comes out of the greater sciatic foramen. So get one of these. Might as well use our. So it's going to come out. I'll take several ventral rami. This is pudendal nerve, and it's going to come out the greater sciatic foramina, just like the sciatic nerve does. But then it's going to go over the ischial spine and come forward into this space right here. And it's going to innervate muscles in this area here. It's going to innervate the external urethral sphincter and external anal sphincter around the rectum. It's going to innervate muscles in this area that have to do with ejaculation, so the bulbospongiosis and ischiocavernosus, which we don't talk about. But essentially comes forward and does this perineal area here. So around the scrotum and the dorsal nerve of the penis is going to be in the male, around the vagina, the labia minora majora in the female. So where you see that pathway for the red is the pathway of the pudendal nerve. All right. As far as the charts are concerned, the best chart to see it on is this one back here, the black one, and it's number 114 right here. Okay? So it's a short nerve because it doesn't have far to go, but it goes out and then comes back into the pelvic cavity. And that should be number 8. Okay, let's finish up with the ventricles on page 116, 117. And we have 2 sets of models, 3 actually, to use for this information. So in the lower left hand, that diagram is a diagram of this model, which is similar to what I drew on the board. All right, I have the images up on the screen, but I drew this on the board. Let me reiterate again because it can be confusing. This is a model of space. So yes, this is definitely solid structure. But if we were to fill that space with liquid plastic, replacing the cerebrospinal fluid with liquid plastic and allow it to harden, this is what we would get. Okay? Or if we were to freeze the cerebrospinal fluid, this is what we would get. So this is a space in this little hole right here is actually where 2 parts of the thalami touch each other. So it's kind of the reverse, the negative of what you see. Now in lecture this morning, I diagrammed the lateral ventricles, and it starts out in the frontal lobe, and as the cerebral lobes grow rapidly, they get pulled towards the back and out to the side, and so we see this C shape. And I labeled those regions. Again, that would be something, it's not on your lab manual, but it's a possible extra half point on the lab exam. So all of this is lateral ventricle, but this portion right here is called the anterior horn. It's in the frontal lobe. Okay. This portion back here is the posterior horn, and that would be in the occipital lobe. And this part right here is the inferior horn, and it's in the temporal lobe. Can I see that? Okay. So anterior horn in the frontal lobe, posterior horn in the occipital lobe, and inferior horn and the temporal lobe. Okay. We have a lateral ventricle in each hemisphere of the brain. By numbers, there are ventricles 1 and 2, but we just call them lateral ventricles. Okay. Now, they're outside or lateral to the mid-cut of the brain. So when we do a mid-sagittal cut and cut the brains in half, this is the view that you get. You can't see the lateral ventricles. We would have to open this membrane right here. Now, if we go just an inch lateral, you can pick out the lateral ventricles. So when we do the sheep brain dissection, we'll be able to open that membrane and peer inside and see the lateral ventricles, okay? But from the brain models, the plastic models, the hard ones, you can't do that. You can't see the lateral ventricle. On your diagram, lateral ventricle is letter G. H would be the interventricular foramen, right here, where the CSF flows from the lateral ventricle into the third ventricle. The third ventricle is a mid-sagittal structure. All the other structures are too. So the third ventricle is rather shallow. If I were to pour water in there, it's about 1 millimeter deep, it would stay there. So when the two halves of the brain are together, this space is about 2 millimeters wide. Like I said, you put two big tall buildings close together, and that gap, the alleyway between them, is what we have as the third ventricle. So we have the thalamus, which is a walnut-sized gray matter, and the other thalamus, and they come very close together, and that space is the third ventricle. Okay? So that would be letter J in your diagram. And then there's a narrow channel passing through the midbrain. The midbrain is the least change from our original embryonic development. And so that part of the ventricular system looks the most like the spinal cord central canal. And that's the cerebral aqueduct. So that would be letter K. And then remember I said the part of the brain that develops into the pons and the medulla undergo a flexion. And when that happens, the ventricular space widens at that bend, and we have a diamond shape, fourth ventricle. So on this view, here would be the cerebral aqueduct, and here is a diamond-shaped structure here. And that would be letter L. But you're seeing it as a sagittal view, not a posterior view. So imagine that I'm the fourth ventricle. Okay, cerebral aqueduct is coming here, and then it forms the diamond. At the ends of the diamonds on the side are the openings for the lateral apertures. And then at the point where my feet would be the opening for the single median aperture. So on this model, to the side here, I want to swing around, these would be the two lateral apertures. And this little piece here that looks like a shark's dorsal fin is the fluid that froze as it was going out the median aperture. Okay. Again, on the sagittal view, here is the fourth ventricle and the cerebellum forming its roof. Down at the outside of that would be one of the lateral apertures, deep in there. And then the median aperture is here going up behind the cerebellum. Okay. So on Wednesday we'll talk about the flow of cerebral spinal fluid. So the M is one of the lateral apertures. M as in Mary. And N as in Norbert is the median aperture. Now, the larger diagram is looking at this model. So I mentioned the sinuses, but I haven't really talked about them yet. We'll learn more of them with the cardiovascular system. But remember, the brain is also surrounded by the same meninges as the spinal cord. So the outer, tougher layer that you see here is the dura mater. And you can see that in this model. So we've got bone. And then here is dura mater. This would be dura mater between the cerebellum and the occipital lobe. So in the midline of this dura mater is the superior sagittal sinus. It's not the subarachnoid space. It's a split in the dura mater. You can also see it for our head. Not just any head. So here it is, this split in the midline, and our CSF and venous blood is going to be draining into that. So this is the superior sagittal sinus. All right, we'll learn the other ones again with the cardiovascular system. So that's in the dura mater. On here, you can see part of it right here, and part of it here, and a cross-section of it here. Okay. Now, this gap right here is the subarachnoid space. So remember, the arachnoid matter was just deep to the dura mater. That's the yellow or orange line under this gray dura mater. The red line is pia mater. And the gap between them is where we find CSF fluid in the subarachnoid space. So this is the one diagram that coloring really helps to differentiate all these lines. So A is dura mater. D is in dog, is your superior sagittal sinus. B is arachnoid matter. So if you want to color it the same color as this model, it would be yellow. And then red is pia mater, and that would be letter C. Between B and C is a subarachnoid space, and that would be letter E, as in ear. Part of the arachnoid matters we'll talk about on Wednesday bulges into the sagittal sinus as arachnoid villi, and this is where the actual fluid crosses into the sinus. And that is shown as letter F on the left-hand side of your diagram. Okay, finally, in the floor of the lateral ventricle, in the roof of the third ventricle, in the fourth ventricle, the ependymal cells and the pia mater form a complex where we actually see the secretion of CSF. And when we do the sheep brain dissection, it looks like algae, brown algae. And those two tissues together are called the choroid plexus. So one location of the choroid plexus is shown as letter I in your diagram. And although letter M is the lateral aperture, right by letter M you can see some more choroid plexus in the diagram. It'll mean more when we actually see it in the sheep brain. Okay, we'll stop there. And Wednesday we'll do brain. We're going to talk about brain in lecture, but in lab I'm going to go over brain stem so that we have a little bit more ease of study time when we get back from the spring break. Feel free to help yourself to any of the models that are up front.